Imagine starting at a new school full of dreams, only to face unimaginable hardships. Mia thought she was ready for the challenges, but nothing could have prepared her for the bullying and cruelty she would face. Watch to the end to see her journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Mia sat quietly in her seat, trying to calm her nerves as she took in her new surroundings. The polished floors, pristine desks, and towering windows of Elite Academy were unlike anything she'd seen before. She felt a mix of awe and nervousness. This was one of the best schools in the country, and her father had worked tirelessly to get her here. He had saved for years, believing that this school could be her gateway to opportunities they'd only dreamed about. She wanted to make him proud. Yet, as she looked around the classroom, an uneasy feeling crept in. The classroom was filled with students, each seemingly absorbed in their own worlds, but Mia could feel their glances flickering her way, sizing her up with a quiet intensity. She kept telling herself it was normal. She was new here, and it was natural to draw some attention, but as the moments stretched on, the glances seemed less welcoming and more scrutinizing, making her feel as if she were being silently judged. The bell rang, breaking her thoughts, and a tall, stern-looking woman entered the room with a brisk pace. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, and her gaze swept across the class, silencing any whispers that might have lingered. "Good morning, everyone," the woman began, her voice carrying a tone that demanded attention. "I am Miss Carter, your biology teacher. Let us begin with some housekeeping. We have a new student joining us today." She looked down at her notes, clearly pausing for effect. "Mia Thompson." Mia felt every pair of eyes turn her way, and she swallowed, feeling her cheeks warm. Miss Carter looked up, her gaze cold and precise, landing on Mia with a slight narrowing of her eyes. "Let us all welcome Mia to the academy," she said, though her tone felt more like a command than a genuine invitation. A few students muttered a half-hearted greeting, quickly averting their gazes. Others exchanged glances that Mia couldn't quite interpret, though their expressions seemed more curious than welcoming. Mia forced herself to smile, nodding slightly, hoping that this was all just the natural awkwardness of being new. She reminded herself that first days were never easy. As Miss Carter began the day's lesson, Mia did her best to concentrate, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, her every move silently noted. She tried to blend in, taking careful notes, and keeping her head down. But as the class continued, Miss Carter seemed to have a habit of letting her gaze linger on Mia whenever she posed a question to the class. Each time, Mia felt her heart rate quicken, hoping she wouldn't be called on. Finally, Miss Carter directed a question toward Mia, catching her off guard. Mia scrambled through her notes, feeling the weight of the class's attention pressing down on her. She managed to stammer out a hesitant answer, but her voice was barely above a whisper. Miss Carter raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Mia, at this academy, we speak with confidence," she said sharply. "If you want to keep up, you'll need to do better than that." The words stung, and Mia felt herself sink a little lower in her seat. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She heard a faint snicker from a boy a few seats behind her, and she clenched her fists beneath her desk, fighting the urge to react. She told herself to stay calm, to focus, and not let it get to her. But Miss Carter's tone carried an edge that felt cold and dismissive, leaving Mia with a sense that she had already failed in some invisible way. The rest of the day passed in a blur of similar moments, sideways glances, whispers she couldn't quite make out, and the constant feeling of being on display. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Mia felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She made her way to her locker, keeping her head down to avoid eye contact with anyone. But as she reached for her books, she felt a slight nudge from behind that sent her stumbling forward. "Oops!" came a voice behind her, feigning innocence. She turned and saw a group of girls nearby, their smirks poorly concealed as they stifled laughter. Mia wanted to say something to stand up for herself, but the words caught in her throat. She swallowed her frustration, gathering her books and holding back the tears that threatened to surface. The hallways gradually cleared out as students headed to their after-school activities, leaving Mia feeling drained and exhausted. She waited until the halls were almost empty before making her way outside. The fresh air was a relief, but as she walked home, her mind replayed every awkward moment, every whisper and lingering stare, until it felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. When she got home, her father greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes filled with excitement. "So, how was your first day?" he asked, clearly eager to hear about her experience. Mia forced a smile, trying to push the discomfort aside. "It was fine," she said, doing her best to sound cheerful. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want him to think that his hard work to get her into this school had been for nothing. So she nodded along as he talked about the opportunities that lay ahead, the bright future she had in front of her. But as the evening wore on, and she lay in bed, the weight of the day began to settle in, and she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wondered if she'd made a mistake, if she really belonged here. Her father had worked so hard to make this happen, and she didn't want to disappoint him. She promised herself that she'd try harder, that maybe things would get better if she just held on a little longer. Yet, as she drifted into a restless sleep, a small part of her couldn't shake the feeling that the challenges she faced at the academy were only beginning. She bent down to collect her books, trying to ignore the giggles that echoed down the hallway. When she got home that evening, her father asked her how school was going. Mia forced a smile, assuring him that everything was fine, though her heart ached with the weight of the truth. She didn't want him to worry or feel like his sacrifices had been wasted. But each night, as she lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in her mind, making it harder and harder to hold back the tears. She had hoped the treatment she was receiving would fade over time, but it only seemed to be getting worse. The breaking point came during a biology class a few weeks later. Miss Carter had arranged for the students to practice a demonstration on how to treat small injuries in animals using a small model cat with a simulated wound. The lesson was intended to show students how to care for injured pets by cleaning the area, shaving the fur around the wound, and applying a bandage. Miss Carter called Mia up to the front of the class, instructing her to hold the model cat. As Mia stood there nervously, following the teacher's instructions, she noticed Miss Carter observing her with a steely, almost predatory gaze. A few students whispered to each other, glancing at Mia with barely concealed grins, as if they knew something she didn't. "Mia," Miss Carter said, holding up a pair of clippers. "Today we'll be practicing with the clippers. Do you think you can handle it?" Mia nodded, feeling a surge of nervousness. She reached out for the clippers, but Miss Carter held them back, studying her face. "You know," Miss Carter said, her voice icy, "discipline is essential for any real student of science. If you can't learn to follow directions here, maybe you're not suited to this level of education." Before Mia could process what was happening, Miss Carter turned on the clippers, raised them to Mia's head, and, in front of the entire class, shaved a section of her hair. The buzz of the clippers filled the room, and Mia's heart dropped as she felt the cool metal against her scalp. The students gasped, and some laughed, their faces filled with shock and amusement. Sarah and her friends had their hands over their mouths, smirking as they exchanged delighted glances. Mia's mind went blank. Her hands gripped the table as she tried to process what was happening. She wanted to scream, to push Miss Carter away, but her body felt frozen in place, paralyzed by the humiliation. "Let that be a reminder," Miss Carter said, turning off the clippers and stepping back with a satisfied look. "In this academy, discipline and respect for authority are paramount." Mia's hands trembled as she touched the spot on her head where her hair had been shaved. The laughter of her classmates seemed to echo louder, filling the silence that followed Miss Carter's words. She looked down, refusing to let the tears that were building up fall. She couldn't bear to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The rest of the class passed in a haze. Mia felt numb, the weight of what had happened pressing down on her. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, she gathered her things with shaky hands and hurried out of the room, avoiding everyone's gaze as she walked down the hallway. Her head felt light and exposed, the missing patch of hair a constant reminder of her humiliation. She kept her head down, trying to hide it, but the whispers and giggles followed her all the way to her locker. Her fingers shook as she opened it, struggling to keep herself together. Mia didn't wait for the hallway to empty that day. She grabbed her things and made her way to the exit, ignoring the few students who tried to catch her eye with mocking smiles. She walked home quickly, the events of the day replaying in her mind with each step. Every word Miss Carter had spoken, every laugh and sneer from her classmates echoed painfully until her heart felt like it was being crushed under the weight of it all. When she finally reached home, her father greeted her with his usual warm smile, but the sight of him made her heart break. She forced a quick smile, muttered something about having a lot of homework, and hurried to her room, closing the door behind her. As she sat on her bed, the full weight of her day came crashing down, and she let the tears fall. She couldn't hide this pain forever. The cruelty she faced at school was starting to feel insurmountable, and the trust she had once placed in the academy felt like a distant memory. For the first time, she began to wonder if she could keep this up, if she could continue facing each day alone, surrounded by the walls of judgment and humiliation that had become her reality. As she lay there in the dark, her mind drifted to her father. She didn't want to disappoint him, didn't want to admit that she was struggling, but deep down, she knew that she couldn't keep hiding the truth forever. If things didn't change, she would have to tell him. And as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she made a silent promise to herself: if the cruelty at school continued, she wouldn't face it alone. She would finally let her father in, no matter how much it scared her. The days that followed the incident with Miss Carter's clippers felt like a nightmare for Mia. The missing patch of hair, now unevenly trimmed to match the rest, was a constant reminder of the humiliation she had endured. She felt exposed and raw. Each step through the school hallways filled with whispers, smirks, and quiet laughter. The harsh stares and barely concealed smiles of her classmates now seemed sharper, more mocking, as though they found fresh fuel in her shame. Every morning, as she entered the towering gates of the academy, Mia braced herself. The once impressive school now felt like an unwelcoming fortress. With its polished floors and tall windows, it did nothing to ease the sense of dread that weighed heavily on her. Each classroom felt like a trap, each seat a spotlight on her shame. And Miss Carter's biology class was the hardest place to be. Miss Carter's tone had softened at all. If anything, it had become even colder. There was a new, unnerving satisfaction in the way she looked at Mia, a subtle smirk that lingered at the corner of her lips whenever Mia fumbled with an answer or struggled to keep up with the lesson. She continued calling on Mia for answers she didn't know, using every slip or moment of hesitation as a chance to highlight her lack of discipline or preparedness. "Mia," Miss Carter said one day, pausing the lecture to fix her with a pointed gaze, "it seems like you're struggling to keep up. Perhaps this school is not the right fit for you." Her voice held no empathy, only the same cold authority she always used, as though Mia were nothing more than an inconvenience in her perfectly organized class. Mia could feel her classmates' eyes on her, some sympathetic, but most filled with the same quiet judgment she had grown so familiar with. Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of anger and shame, but she kept her head down, willing herself to stay calm, to hold it together. After class, Sarah and her friends seemed to have renewed enthusiasm for their cruelty. They crossed paths with her in the hallway whenever they could, bumping into her, tossing little comments her way, each one sharper than the last. "Guess you got the short end of the stick, huh, Thompson?" Sarah would smirk, her friends giggling beside her. One day, as Mia reached her locker, she found a slip of paper crumpled inside. She unfolded it with trembling hands, her stomach twisting as she read the message scrawled in bold, mocking letters: "Wrong school. Wrong girl." The words hit her like a slap, their simplicity somehow intensifying the cruel message. She crumpled the paper in her hand, shoving it into her pocket as she took a steadying breath, fighting the tears that prickled at the corners of her eyes. Humiliation and the growing sense of isolation consumed her. Her appetite dwindled, and her sleep was restless, plagued by dreams of cold classrooms and mocking laughter. One afternoon, after an especially harsh biology class, Mia found herself sitting in the restroom, staring into the mirror. She barely recognized the girl looking back at her. Her eyes looked dull, her face pale, and her expression haunted by a sadness she couldn't shake. She reached up, running her fingers over the uneven strands of her hair, feeling the sharp sting of shame all over again, the clippers, the laughter, the stinging remarks. They replayed in her mind in a loop, each memory cutting deeper than the last. The restroom door opened, and she quickly looked down, pretending to be adjusting her bag. She could feel the presence of other girls in the restroom, their quiet snickers as they saw her, but she kept her eyes averted, focusing on the cold, hard floor beneath her feet. As she walked back into the hallway, she caught sight of Sarah and her group leaning against the lockers, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Mia tried to walk past them, keeping her head down, but they stepped into her path, blocking her way. "Hey, Thompson," Sarah sneered, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How's it going? Thought you'd be too embarrassed to show your face by now." Mia forced herself to stay calm, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "Excuse me," she muttered, trying to step around them, but they closed ranks, refusing to let her pass. "Oh, don't be shy," one of the other girls chimed in with a mocking smile. "We're just trying to be friendly." The group giggled, and Mia felt a surge of anger, a fiery knot building in her chest. But she swallowed it down, refusing to let them see her upset. "I don't have time for this," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Guess we touched a nerve." Sarah smirked, stepping aside with a casual shrug. "See you around, Thompson. Don't go losing any more hair now." They dissolved into laughter as Mia finally made her way past them. Her heart pounded as she forced herself not to look back. The weight of their cruelty settled over her heavier than ever, and for a moment, she wanted nothing more than to disappear, to never set foot in this school again. When the final bell rang, Mia gathered her things, feeling an overwhelming urge to escape. She walked out of the school building quickly, her footsteps hurried as she made her way home. The familiar path felt endless, each step only added to the ache in her chest. She replayed the incident with Sarah and her friends over and over, the humiliation of Miss Carter's words still fresh in her mind. By the time she reached her front door, her hands were shaking, and she felt like she was on the edge of breaking. Her father greeted her with his usual warm smile, but she barely managed a nod in response. She muttered something about having homework and quickly retreated to her room, closing the door behind her. The moment she was alone, the flood of emotions she had been holding back crashed over her, and she sank onto her bed, burying her face in her hands. The tears came, hot and unrelenting, each one carrying the weight of the pain and loneliness she had been hiding. She tried to stifle the sobs, not wanting her father to hear, but the sorrow was too deep, too raw. The memory of the clippers, of Miss Carter's cold eyes, of Sarah's taunting smile they replayed in her mind, each one sharper than the last. For the first time, Mia let herself feel the full extent of her pain. She had tried so hard to be strong, to hold it all together, but the constant cruelty, the relentless humiliation, was more than she could bear. She felt trapped, caught in a cycle of judgment and rejection with no way out. As the sun set outside her window, casting long shadows across her room, Mia sat up, wiping her eyes. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, couldn't keep hiding the bruises, the cuts, the pain. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider telling her father the truth. The thought scared her. She didn't want to disappoint him, didn't want him to regret the sacrifices he had made to send her to this school. But as she sat there, feeling the weight of her sorrow pressing down on her, she knew that she couldn't keep carrying this burden alone. Tomorrow, she would tell him. She would tell him everything, the ridicule, the mockery, the humiliation, the way Miss Carter had shaved her hair and left her exposed before her classmates. She would finally let him see the truth she had been hiding, the truth that she couldn't bear on her own anymore. And as she lay back on her bed, the exhaustion overtaking her, she felt a faint glimmer of relief, a fragile spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, sharing her pain would help ease it. The following morning, as Mia trudged through the Academy's gates, the familiar weight of dread pressed down on her shoulders. She kept her gaze fixed downward, trying to ignore the whispers and glances that trailed her every step. Today, however, a fragile resolve glowed within her. She would tell her father everything. The school day passed in a blur, with Miss Carter's voice blending into a background murmur, and her classmates' mocking laughs slipping through her thoughts without sticking. She was focused on what lay ahead. The thought of finally revealing the truth gave her strength, but it also filled her with dread. How could she explain the pain she had endured without seeing disappointment in her father's eyes? What if he regretted the sacrifices he had made to get her here? By the time she got home, her stomach churned with anxiety. Her father was waiting for her in the kitchen, his face lighting up as he caught sight of her. "There you are," he said with a warm smile, his voice filled with genuine joy. "How was school today?" Mia forced herself to meet his gaze, taking in the love and pride that shone in his eyes. She hesitated, her throat tightening. She could feel the weight of the words she was about to say building up, ready to spill out, but she wasn't sure where to begin. "Dad," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. He noticed the hesitation in her voice and frowned, his face softening with concern. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" he asked gently, stepping closer. The tenderness in his eyes melted her last bit of resolve to keep silent. She took a shaky breath, feeling the emotions she'd been holding back begin to surface. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, reaching out to take her hand. "Of course, honey. You can tell me anything." She swallowed, struggling to steady herself, and then, as if a dam had broken, the words began to pour out. She told him everything: the relentless criticism from Miss Carter, the cold stares and mocking remarks, the way her classmates would shove her in the halls and laugh as she stumbled. She spoke of the cruel note left in her locker, the taunts, and the way Sarah and her friends had made it their mission to humiliate her every chance they got. Her father listened in silence, his face growing darker with each detail she revealed. He gripped her hand tightly, his jaw clenching as he processed her words. But Mia hadn't yet told him the worst part: the incident with the clippers. She paused, feeling a fresh wave of shame rise within her, but she knew she couldn't keep it from him. "And then, in biology," she stammered, her voice catching as she struggled to find the right words. "Miss Carter, she used the clippers on my hair in front of everyone." Here's the revised version of Part 4 of your script, with timestamps removed, grammar and spelling checked, and character names kept consistent. "Clippers on my hair in front of everyone," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked down, unable to meet her father's gaze, feeling the humiliation of that day crash over her all over again. She could feel her father's grip tighten, his anger simmering just beneath the surface, but he stayed quiet, letting her continue. "It was a disciplinary lesson," Mia whispered, her voice shaking. "Everyone laughed. They watched as she shaved part of my hair. I didn't know what to do." There was a long, heavy silence. When she finally looked up, she saw a mix of anger and sorrow in her father's eyes. His face was pale, his fists clenched, and for a moment, she feared he might explode with rage. "I had no idea," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong." His gaze softened as he looked at her, a mixture of guilt and fierce determination flickering in his eyes. "This is not okay. Not even close. They had no right to treat you like this." Mia shook her head, her heart heavy. "It's not your fault, Dad. I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could handle it." He reached up, cupping her face gently, his hands warm and steady. "You should never have to handle something like this alone, Mia. No one should," he said firmly. "You're my daughter, and I will do everything in my power to protect you." The conviction in his voice sent a ripple of relief through her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the tightness in her chest ease, just a little. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, letting herself feel the warmth and safety she had been missing for so long. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm going to the school. I'm going to talk to the principal and to Miss Carter. They can't treat you like this, and they won't get away with it." The words filled Mia with a glimmer of hope, but a flicker of doubt surfaced too. "But what if it makes things worse?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He shook his head, his expression hardening. "No. I won't let that happen. You've been brave enough to endure this alone, but you don't have to do it anymore. I'm here now, and I'm going to fight for you, Mia." The strength in his words filled her with a newfound courage. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe things could change, that she didn't have to face this darkness alone. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as fresh tears slipped down her cheeks. This time, tears of relief. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Thank you?" They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's embrace. The silence filled with unspoken promises and a sense of unity. Her father held her close, his hand gently stroking her back as though reassuring her that he would be there no matter what. Eventually, he pulled back, looking at her with a soft smile that eased some of the pain in her heart. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Tomorrow, I'm going to call the school. We're going to have a meeting, and I'm going to make sure they understand that this behavior will not be tolerated. Not by Miss Carter. Not by anyone." Mia nodded, feeling a mixture of nerves and relief. The thought of facing Miss Carter and her classmates still filled her with dread, but knowing her father would be by her side made it a little easier to bear. She felt a renewed sense of hope, a belief that maybe things could get better, that maybe she could find her place here without feeling so small and broken. As she lay in bed that night, her mind replayed the conversation with her father. Each word resonated with the strength and reassurance she had so desperately needed. The memory of his support was a balm to her wounded heart, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. She knew things wouldn't change overnight, that there would still be challenges and difficult days ahead. But for now, she felt hopeful, safe in the knowledge that she didn't have to face it all alone anymore. Her father had promised to stand up for her, to protect her from the hurt and humiliation that had become a constant in her life. That promise was enough to let her close her eyes and drift into a peaceful sleep, her heart a little lighter than it had been in a long time. The next morning, Mia sat at the kitchen table, watching her father prepare for the day with a steely determination. His jaw was set, his eyes intense as he reviewed the notes he'd written down. Mia felt a mixture of relief and nervousness as she watched him. Today was the day he would confront the school, the day he would stand up for her in a way she hadn't dared to on her own. As they drove to the school, her father reached over and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, Mia," he said, "you don't have to say a word if you don't want to. I'll be there with you through all of this." She nodded, her stomach twisting with anxiety. She was both grateful for his support and terrified of what might happen. Her mind raced with possibilities, wondering what Miss Carter would say, how the principal would react, and whether any of this would truly change her situation. But she held on to the hope that somehow her father's presence might make a difference. They arrived at the school and were directed to a small conference room where the meeting would take place. The principal, Mr. Townsend, was already seated at the table, his expression polite but strained. Miss Carter sat beside him, her face calm and composed, though Mia caught a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps annoyance or irritation at being called to account. Mr. Townsend rose to shake her father's hand. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice, Mr. Thompson," he said, his tone courteous but formal. "I understand you have some concerns regarding Mia's experience here at the academy." "That's putting it mildly," her father replied, his tone edged with barely restrained anger. He wasted no time launching into an account of everything Mia had told him the night before. He spoke of the relentless singling out in class, the way Miss Carter had shaved Mia's hair in front of everyone, and the mockery she had endured from her classmates as a result. His voice grew harder as he described how these actions had left his daughter humiliated, isolated, and afraid to even attend school. Miss Carter's calm expression began to shift, her brows knitting together as her lips tightened. "Mr. Thompson," she interrupted, her voice cool and controlled, "I assure you, I run my classroom with the utmost professionalism. If Mia felt singled out, that's unfortunate, but I hold all my students to the same high standard. This is a challenging school, and not everyone is suited to its demands." Mia felt a rush of anger rise within her. How easily Miss Carter dismissed her pain, as if her suffering was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Her father's gaze narrowed, his voice turning icy. "Are you implying that my daughter isn't suited to this school, Miss Carter?" "Clippers on my hair in front of everyone," Mia whispered, her voice cold. "Lily is a new student. Adjusting to a new environment can be challenging, and I've done everything in my power to make sure she feels welcome." Her father's voice rose, his anger barely contained. "By humiliating her in front of the entire class? By allowing other students to bully her without consequence?" He shook his head, his face tight with frustration. "Do you honestly think that's acceptable?" Mr. Townsend held up a hand, his face pale and tense. "Please let us remain calm. We will certainly look into these allegations, Mr. Thompson. The school's reputation is very important to us, and we strive to create a safe and supportive environment for all students." Her father took a deep breath, visibly regaining his composure. "Thank you," he said, his voice sharp but steady. "I appreciate that, Mr. Townsend. But I want to make one thing very clear. If this behavior continues, I will not hesitate to take this matter further. My daughter deserves to feel safe at school, and I will not allow anyone to take that away from her." A heavy silence settled over the room, his words hanging in the air. Mia felt her heart pounding in her chest, both nervous and grateful for her father's support. She dared not look directly at Miss Carter, afraid that even a glance might reignite the cold, dismissive look in her teacher's eyes. Instead, she kept her gaze on her father, drawing strength from his presence. Mr. Townsend nodded, his expression serious. "We will conduct a thorough review of this situation, Mr. Thompson. In the meantime, Miss Carter, I believe it would be best if we take steps to ensure Mia feels comfortable and safe in your class." Miss Carter's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Mr. Townsend," she replied, though her tone was clipped, as if she could barely conceal her resentment. Mr. Townsend glanced at Mia, offering her a brief, practiced smile. "Mia, I want you to know that you can always come to me if you're having any issues. We're committed to providing a positive environment for all our students." Mia managed to nod, though she couldn't bring herself to smile back. The words were polite, rehearsed, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they held little real weight. Still, the fact that her father had stood up for her had forced them to acknowledge her pain was a small comfort. When they left the office, her father's expression remained steely. His hand rested protectively on her shoulder as they walked down the hallway. She felt his resolve, his determination to protect her, and it filled her with a sense of relief she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things might start to change. But as the days passed, change was slow to come. Though Miss Carter was less openly harsh with her, Mia could still feel the coldness in her teacher's gaze, the subtle dismissal in her tone. While some of her classmates backed off, others continued to find ways to make her feel isolated. Sarah and her friends were as relentless as ever, keeping up their whispered comments and occasional shoves in the hallway. One afternoon, as Mia was gathering her books from her locker, Sarah brushed past her, muttering under her breath, "Daddy's little princess can't handle a little teasing, huh?" Mia felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her head down, refusing to give Sarah the satisfaction of a reaction. She was determined to keep going, to prove that she was stronger than their taunts. But each day felt like a new test, a challenge she wasn't sure she could endure. Then, a week later, her father called her into the living room with a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "I've spoken with several parents," he began, his tone firm. They've shared stories of their own children facing similar issues with Miss Carter. It seems this isn't the first time she has treated a student this way. Mia's eyes widened in surprise. "You mean she has been doing this to other kids too?" He nodded, his jaw set. "Apparently, yes. And the parents are ready to back us up. I've spoken with an attorney as well. We're going to ensure that Miss Carter and the administration understand that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Mia felt a surge of hope rise within her, a sense of relief she hadn't expected. She had thought she was alone, that her experiences were unique, but knowing that other parents were willing to stand with them made her feel stronger. Her father had turned her private pain into a cause, a mission to make sure no other student would have to endure what she had. The following week, they held a meeting with the principal, several other concerned parents, and the attorney her father had hired. The attorney presented a detailed account of the allegations, backed by statements from parents and students who had experienced similar treatment from Miss Carter. Mr. Townsend's calm demeanor faltered as he listened, his face growing increasingly tense. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the school could no longer ignore the situation. They agreed to suspend Miss Carter pending further investigation, and a commitment was made to review the school's policies on bullying and discrimination. Mia felt a sense of vindication, a weight lifting from her shoulders as she realized that her father's efforts had finally brought about real change. As they walked out of the school together, her father placed an arm around her, a proud smile on his face. "You're stronger than you know, Mia," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. "And I'll always be here to help you fight for what's right." Mia smiled back, feeling a newfound sense of peace settle over her. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had the strength to face them. Her father had shown her the power of standing up, of refusing to back down in the face of injustice. And as they left the school grounds, she knew she was ready to embrace whatever the future held, no longer burdened by the fear and isolation she had once felt. In the days following Miss Carter's suspension, a palpable shift seemed to ripple through the academy. Mia still walked the familiar hallways with caution, but there was an undeniable change in the way people looked at her. Where there had once been mocking stares and smug smirks, there was now an undercurrent of curiosity, a quiet respect that she hadn't felt before. She felt the weight of the hostility start to lift, replaced by a sense of tentative support from students who had once ignored her or even joined in on the bullying. The administration wasted no time implementing new policies. Announcements echoed over the intercom, detailing a stricter stance against bullying and discrimination, making it clear that the school was now actively addressing these issues. Assemblies were scheduled, and the entire student body was required to attend a series of workshops on respect, inclusivity, and the importance of standing against prejudice. At first, Mia wasn't sure what to expect. She had grown so accustomed to feeling isolated, to being an outsider. It was hard to believe that real change was possible. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the students she passed. But over time, she noticed small, surprising shifts. Sarah and her friends, who had once taken every opportunity to make her feel small, now kept their distance. Their snide remarks and accidental shoves had ceased. Sarah, in particular, seemed more subdued, her usual smirk replaced by a quiet, almost resentful silence whenever Mia walked by. It wasn't an apology, but it was a relief to know she was no longer the target of Sarah's disdain. One afternoon, as Mia was gathering her books from her locker, a girl from her biology class, Emma, approached her. Emma had always been quiet, one of the students who kept to herself, rarely interacting with others unless absolutely necessary. She offered Mia a hesitant smile, her hands nervously clutching her textbooks. "Hey, Mia," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. Clippers on my hair in front of everyone, Mia whispered, her voice cold. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, Emma said, her voice catching Mia off guard. I didn't realize how bad it was for you. Mia blinked, surprised by the unexpected apology. She looked at Emma, a mix of gratitude and disbelief filling her chest. She hadn't expected anyone to reach out to her, let alone apologize. She managed a small smile, her voice soft as she replied, Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate it. Emma nodded, looking relieved. I'm glad you're still here, she added, her voice warm and genuine. It probably doesn't mean much, but I think you're really brave. The words warmed Mia's heart in a way she hadn't expected. It was a small gesture, but it held more meaning than Emma could know. Mia felt a sense of acceptance, a crack in the wall of isolation that had surrounded her for so long. Over the next few weeks, the new policies began to reshape the atmosphere at the academy. The workshops encouraged students to reflect on their actions, to understand the impact of their words and behavior on others. Teachers enforced stricter rules against bullying, and students who once felt comfortable taunting others now faced consequences they hadn't before. Mia could see the subtle changes in her classmates' behavior. Students who had once whispered behind her back now offered polite nods as they passed her in the hallway. She no longer flinched at every snicker, no longer felt the same crushing weight of fear every time she stepped into a classroom. Slowly, she was beginning to reclaim her sense of self, piece by piece, and with each passing day, the burden of her past experiences grew lighter. One afternoon, as Mia sat in the library working on an assignment, a group of students walked by her table. She looked up and recognized one of them as Ethan, a boy who had once been a close friend of Sarah's. He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful, before offering her a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes to Mia. She was no longer invisible, no longer just the target of mockery. She was beginning to be seen as an equal, someone who deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. The following week, Mr. Townsend, the principal, made an announcement during homeroom. His voice resonated through the classroom speakers, carrying a tone of solemnity that captured everyone's attention. Good morning, students, he began. As many of you know, we are committed to creating a supportive and respectful environment for all students. I'm pleased to announce that we have implemented new guidelines to prevent bullying and to encourage inclusivity. Workshops will be held over the next few weeks, and I encourage each of you to take part in making our school a better place for everyone. The classroom fell silent as Mr. Townsend's words echoed through the room. Some students exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and surprise, while others simply nodded, as though accepting the change without question. For Mia, the announcement was more than just words, it was a symbol of the progress she had fought so hard for. A small but powerful victory that reminded her of the strength she had found within herself. After the announcement, as she made her way through the hallway, Mia noticed that her classmates seemed more cautious, as if suddenly aware of the consequences of their actions. Though she still encountered the occasional glare or snide remark, the open hostility she had once faced had significantly lessened. Even Sarah, who had once relished making her feel small, seemed to have backed off. Her smug confidence was replaced by a sullen silence whenever they crossed paths. Mia didn't need Sarah's validation, nor did she seek out apologies from those who had hurt her. She was content with the knowledge that they were no longer a constant source of pain in her life. The space they had once filled with mockery and disdain now felt open, ready to be filled with something better: friendship, acceptance, and a sense of belonging she had once thought impossible. One afternoon during lunch, Emma waved to her from across the cafeteria, and Mia found herself smiling as she joined her and a few other students at their table. They chatted easily, the conversation flowing without the tension that had once defined her interactions with others. For the first time, Mia felt a sense of friendship, of true connection, and it warmed her heart in a way she hadn't thought she would experience at this school. As they laughed and talked, Emma leaned over, her expression sincere. You know, Mia, she began, her voice soft. I'm really glad you're here. I know things were hard at first, but I admire how strong you are. You stood up, not just for yourself, but for everyone. Mia felt a surge of gratitude, her heart swelling with appreciation for the kindness she had finally found. Thank you, Emma, she replied, her voice filled with warmth. I couldn't have done it alone. My dad, he helped me realize that I deserved to be here, that I had a right to feel safe. Emma nodded, a hint of admiration in her eyes. Well, I think we're all better because of it. You made everyone realize a lot of things, including me. The lunch period passed quickly, filled with laughter and a sense of camaraderie that Mia had once thought she would never experience. It was as though a heavy cloud had lifted, and she could finally see the light of friendship and acceptance shining through. The changes at school continued to unfold in small, meaningful ways. Teachers were more attentive, taking the time to address any signs of bullying they witnessed. Students who had once felt isolated found themselves included in conversations and activities. And while not everyone embraced the new policies with enthusiasm, the shift in atmosphere was undeniable. Mia's confidence began to blossom as she embraced the supportive environment she had helped create. She no longer walked the hallways with her head down, no longer felt the sting of loneliness. With each passing day, she was learning to hold her head high, to walk with a newfound strength that made her feel as though she truly belonged. And as she navigated this new chapter, she felt the pain of her past experiences fading, replaced by a quiet resilience that filled her with hope. The sting of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer just a new girl, the different one. She was Mia, a student, a friend, a young woman with a voice and a purpose. One evening, as she walked home with her father, she reflected on how far they had come together. The pain of those early days had been real, but so was the strength she had discovered within herself. Her father had taught her the power of standing up, of refusing to let anyone diminish her worth, and she knew that lesson would stay with her for the rest of her life. When they reached their front door, her father paused, turning to her with a thoughtful smile. You know, Mia, he said, his tone warm and reflective. You've taught me something too. You showed me that even in the face of hardship, there's always room for hope and change. Mia looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. I couldn't have done it without you, Dad, she replied, her voice filled with sincerity. Thank you for everything. They embraced, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. They had faced the challenges together, and had come out stronger for it. As they stood there, the sun setting behind them, Mia knew that this was just the beginning. She had faced the darkness, had fought for her place, and had won. And with her father by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future might hold, knowing that she was never truly alone. With Miss Carter permanently removed and new policies firmly in place, life at the academy began to feel like something Mia had never imagined: safe, welcoming, and filled with possibility. The weeks of struggle, the nights spent lying awake with anxiety, the endless humiliations, all of it felt like a distant memory now. Though she knew she would never forget what she had endured, every morning as she entered the school, she felt the quiet confidence settle over her. As spring arrived, Mia's life at school began to change. The place that once felt isolating was now somewhere she could feel respected, heard, and supported. With her father's encouragement and her own resilience, Mia found new sea. Her classmates, once distant and cold, now smiled at her in the hallways. The whispered taunts had all but disappeared, and the fear that had gripped her for so long slowly began to fade away. Mia had come to realize that her journey wasn't just about surviving at this school, it was about thriving, about finding the strength to create a future she could be proud. The work she had done with the student-led initiative on anti-bullying and mental health support had allowed her to grow in ways she never imagined. The connection she felt with Emma and the other students who had joined her in that mission had become a source of power, something she never thought she would have. In opening up, in sharing her pain, Mia had not only healed but had become a catalyst for change in a community that had once made her feel so small. One afternoon, as she walked home from school with her father, she reflected on how far she had come. She had fought for her place, fought for her voice, and ultimately, had fought for her future. With her father by her side, she knew she would never have to face the darkness alone. Mia looked up at him as they walked side by side, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. I know things have been hard, but you've been my rock through it all. You've taught me what it means to stand up for myself, to never let anyone tell me that I don't belong." Her father squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, Mia. You've taught me something too about resilience, about finding light in the darkest of places. You've shown me that even in the face of adversity, there's always hope, always room for change." Mia smiled softly, feeling the weight of those words settle deep within her. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace knowing that her struggles were not in vain, knowing that she had made a difference in her own life and in the lives of others. As they approached their front door, Mia stopped for a moment to look up at the sky. The stars were beginning to twinkle, the world around them full of possibilities. She had faced her fears, had found her strength, and now, with everything she had learned, she was ready for whatever came next. And as the seasons changed, so too did Mia. She was no longer the girl who had walked through those school gates unsure of herself, afraid of the unknown. She was a young woman who had embraced her journey, found her place, and built a future filled with hope. Together, she and her father had changed more than just a school. They had shown the world the power of resilience, the importance of speaking up for what is right, and the undeniable strength that comes from standing together in the face of adversity. As Mia stood there, with the warmth of her father's presence beside her and the vast expanse of the future ahead, she knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. She was ready for everything life had in store, confident, empowered, and never again alone.